Are you part of the alt middle? What's that, you say? It's a new term that I learned from Dr. Peter Attia on his amazing podcast, which is one of the things I'm going to be going over today. Not only that, I'm going to be going over something really light. The Charter of Freedoms here in Canada, because guess what? I don't know shit about it, and I think it's time to start learning a bit more. So stay tuned to this episode. We talk about those two very important things, and I'm going to drop a very special way to get involved with fighting back on how to take control of your lives and how to not feel like a crazy person anymore due to COVID-19. Stay tuned.
Stop making old man sounds. Yeah, that's right. You know what I'm talking about. Those aches, those pains that cause you to groan every time you get out of your chair or into your car. That's not normal. Start getting after it by getting your copy of the Nimble Warrior book. This is a book that I created in order to start fixing things like back pain, knee pain, shin splints, you name it. In order to get your hands on a copy, you have to head to thenimblewarriorbook.com, and you can pick this book up for just the cost of shipping and handling. Additionally, for every book that you purchase, I'll be donating $1 to the Warrior Adventures Canada charity here in Canada that helps veterans get back on their feet by going out into the wilderness and doing some really interesting excursions. So head to thenimblewarriorbook.com, get your copy today, and start getting nimble immediately.
Welcome to the Hard to Kill podcast, the go-to podcast for military, LEO, and EMS professionals, sharing ideas and experiences from around the world to make you hard to kill. Here's your host, Dave Morrow.
All right, let's get right into it. Fucking fed up. I'm in the health and wellness space, have been for a while. And as you might tell by the stuffiness of my voice, I'm dealing with the tail end of the Omicron. And I guess I wanted to get on the airwaves to just describe what I've been listening to, what I've been seeing, what I've been trying not to see over the last few days, weeks, because things are starting to degenerate and spiral out of control. And seeing it from my perspective is, it's really, I guess, past the point of irrationality. And now we're at the point of, holy shit, we may be seeing a complete and utter ungluing, unsticking of society. And I don't feel very good about the way forward. And I wanted to just voice my frustrations here on this platform because I have it and I'm thankful for it. I'm grateful for you to listen. And I wanted to just touch on a few key points. The main one is, if you don't listen to the rest of the podcast, I strongly urge you to go listen to Peter Attia's The Drive podcast. If you don't know who Peter Attia is, he's been a semi-regular guest on Joe Rogan's podcast. He's a Canadian medical doctor. He is a Stanford graduate. He treats COVID patients. He is a very level-headed, rational human being, and is also a incredible athlete, endurance athlete. So he leads by example. He walks the walk. He talks the talk. There's his TEDx talk a few years ago about metabolic disease that really changed the way I looked at obesity and those individuals struggling with obesity, because he was indignant towards them as a medical doctor and knew that ethically he had to push that down, and he was very honest about it. And what he realized when he started dealing with metabolic disease was that, oh my God, it's not the fact that those individuals are lazy or not working hard enough. They just have the wrong operating parameters, the wrong paradigm to stay and get healthy, because he noticed his markers of metabolic health were suffering because he was eating tons of carbohydrates. And those carbohydrates were leading to pre-diabetes. It didn't make sense to him as a medical doctor, following the guidelines that the government puts out, as a long distance endurance athlete, that he would end up with pre-diabetes. So he took a deep dive and realized it was carbohydrate based. And everybody needed to essentially change their paradigm and change the health paradigm around it. So that's how he consults his patients. So that got me immediately. I was like, wow, okay. Like I'm fully on board with that. I've seen the benefits and I see, major changes in my health since I essentially, I wouldn't say gave up carbohydrates, but I put them on the shelf, both figuratively and literally over the last few years. And I've been able to do things like the Ironman and stay relatively healthy, except for this little bout of cold that I have right now. And the reason why I bring that up is because he is a very reflective, self-reflective medical doctor who deals with actual COVID patients. These are the individuals that we need to listen to. The doctors that are paraded out on the news are typically just advocacy shills. And he brings this up in a very interesting way in the podcast. He says that we don't seem to understand the difference between advocacy and science. And so I'll leave it at that. I'll get into a little bit more details right now, but if you're pressed for time, stop listening to me, go listen to his podcast. It's podcast number 189, COVID-19, Current State of Affairs, Omicron, and the Search for the End Game. I'm going to go over a few of the points that he makes here with two other doctors they had on the podcast, but man, what a listen, and should be mandatory listening for every human being in the Western world as of now. So go have a listen to that, and I'll post this in the show notes so you can have the link to it. Okay, so carrying on with my spiel here, I wanted to just touch on a few key things aside, and I'll get back to Peter Attia's podcast very soon, but the stage I think we're in with respects to how we're dealing with this as a country here in Canada is, I think we're past the fear stage. I mean, there was this initial kind of uneasiness, like, hey, is the government going to overreach here? Are they really going to keep on overreaching? And time again, they've overreached. In Quebec, it is a dystopian exercise in, I guess, Orwellian philosophy here. Like I can't seem to get a grip of, my emotions around this, because there's so many to unpack, I guess. And I don't want to get too deep into it here because it's something that takes up way too much of my brain space on a regular day. But ultimately we're in the battle phase now for our Constitution and our Confederacy. And I hate to say it, but I mean, when laws, or I should say our Constitution, which as a Canadian is weird to say, I'm having a hard time saying it because that is a very American way to look at things. I mean, we see the American news, they always talk about their amendment rights and their Constitution, and they literally carry it around. A lot of times they have these little plastified ones. I was deployed with some Americans, like they literally have a freaking Constitution like carried around. I'm like, okay, cool. Like I don't know much about my Constitution other than the fact that we learn about it a little bit in our history class. It is not a document that we typically refer to on a regular basis. We hear about charter rights and we learn about it, but we don't really understand them. We just assume everything works well. And I think the difference is because the American Constitution was born out of blood. Ours was born out of a bureaucratic process by essentially leaving the British monarchy from 1982 onwards, more or less. So it's relatively new in a sense. And because of that, I don't think we have a really great appreciation for what this document actually holds in place. Now, I just want to touch on some of the things on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that I think are important. And I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but these are things that lawyers definitely talk about. And it's definitely what politicians understand, because a lot of them are lawyers. And they're dancing around our Constitution in hopes that it won't get challenged, what they're doing. And since we've never really experienced this in Canadian history, we're seeing this uneasy feeling that, oh my God, is this how the future is going to look for us? Are they able to do this? Is this against the law? We don't have a really good grasp of what's going on because it's happened so fast and it's shocking. So to give you an idea of what's going on here in Quebec, if you're not from here, we have a curfew now, which is unbelievable. It's the second time this has happened. So from 2200 to 0400, we're not allowed out of our house. That's right, folks. We're not allowed out of our house. Now, it's Quebec. We don't follow rules for much. So, I mean, I can go out my house, I do so every night at 10 p.m. because I'm naturally defiant. And I go and putter around my road on my sidewalk, there's some people running sometimes. There's a few cars that pass. There's all kinds of leniency if you have a special job that requires you to work late, or you're going to school and you need papers. And it's such a nonsensical thing to do, because you can't really enforce it, other than the fact that if you're on the road, sometimes a cop, I've seen them pull people over and make somebody's day miserable. But let's say I had to go help a friend out. Nope, that's not allowed. Or my parents are sick. Oh, sorry, don't have paper. And that alone is very troubling. And that led me to, okay, well, is this constitutional? Like, can you just say arbitrarily by fiat, you're not allowed out of your house? And so I encourage Canadians to start whipping these Charter of Rights out. Now, a lot of my buddies are cops, and over the last, I guess, 2 decades, I've heard a lot of complaints about the Charter, right? Because it there's a lot about detention and arrest, and you can bring up your charter rights, and police need to be aware of that. And it can also get in the way of a criminal being rightfully charged of a crime because something was done that was against his or her charter rights. And so I can understand the frustration of cops that do a lot of work, and then under the charter rights potentially have somebody who is clearly doing something wrong and illegal get off on a technicality. But the grand scheme of things, the bigger picture is that the reason why that's there is that it's to protect all Canadians, and not just those that are criminals. It's literally to protect everybody's rights. And so there, the big picture is that this is a net good for society. And yes, sometimes it creates a frustrating situation, but overall, that's a good thing. Now, I bring that up too because we have to look at big picture ideas with respects to rights. Rights is a relatively new concept. This is not something that was bestowed upon us since the dawn of humanity. Rights and civil rights is something that only started coming about the last 100 years or so. So it's new for humanity to kind of think in this rights-based manner. Now, the ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union. To bring up this point, they were started during the Civil Rights Movement to defend the rights of African Americans to have a seat at the table, to be like, no, we're citizens like everybody else. And so they struck up that fight that, free speech is important. You need to be able to say what has been guaranteed to us in our Constitution. And they had a really famous case in the 70s where they defended neo-Nazis. These neo-Nazis wanted to have a parade through a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in Chicago suburbs, and it caused an uproar. But the reason why they defended them was because they wanted to protect their free speech rights. And it caused an uproar within the ACLU. A lot of people quit. But ultimately, they won their case. And it was a precedent because it showed that regardless of what you're saying, even if it hurts other people's feelings, the right to be able to say it is fundamentally your right. Now, there's a whole thing about hate speech and all that stuff. But ultimately, what the result was the march was curtailed, and what they did is they just had a rally at a certain area. They came to an agreement. But we can see that even though if you have a strong opposition to Nazi ideology, which I think most of us do, it's still their right to be able to speak. And that's something that I think most of us have no longer got an ability to tolerate, is hearing really, I guess, aggressive or maybe even really intolerable opinions from people that doesn't align with yours. And unfortunately, that is something you do have to be able to tolerate in a democratic society. Democracies are freaking messy, man. You have the ability for people to have all kinds of different thoughts. Having groupthink and thinking all in the same way, and if you don't, you get chastised and thrown into the waste bin of society, is not what this is about. When you have everybody aligned in the same type of thinking, that's where you end up in trouble. And this is where we are right now. So can you just trash our guiding document here for Canada? And in my opinion, the answer is no. I mean, if at the highest level you no longer respect the highest law in the land, well, how does that play out all the way down to the lowest level, at the community level, at the individual level. And, you know, we've also implemented here, just as yesterday, there's going to be a tax on the unvaccinated. Is that constitutional? You know, I'm looking at the Charter of Rights right now, and, you know, there's equality rights. You know, that's the core of the Charter. It says it right here. So there has to be some level of equality in everything. It's called proportionality too. There has to be some, if you put a law in the books, there has to take into account the idea of equality. And we talk about it all the time, but yet we're imposing these laws, which are clearly not based on anything that is, I don't want to say equitable because it's not the same thing, but based on equality. Because if only some people get taxed and others don't, and I'm not talking about buying things or commodities or anything like that. It's based on your attitude or your health decisions. We're going down a dangerous road here. Now, I've been saying kind of tongue in cheek that everybody that doesn't take care of themselves and they have an unhealthy lifestyle that contributes to obesity, yeah, they should be taxed, man. Because guess what? They're the ones that are filling up the hospitals. And if you can't see that, all you need to go to is the Canadian Health Statistics website and see who's actually in the hospital. The overwhelming majority of individuals that die in Canada and that are hospitalized are due to metabolic disease. The leading cause of death is coronary heart disease. The second leading cause of death is cancer. These two diseases are predominantly driven by metabolic disease. Metabolic disease includes obesity, high blood pressure. Okay? These are the things that, diabetes, these are the things that can be controlled by lifestyle changes. So does that mean the individuals that smoke, the individuals that don't take care of their body and let themselves become obese, that take on undue risk by drinking themselves to death, now have to pay a tax as well? Because this is the door that we're opening to a publicly funded Medicare system. Don't forget, the system here in Quebec is funded by the federal government. They get payments to run their own system. So now we've created a system that is no longer equal. Because, I mean, if you take this as a thought experiment and we apply the same rationale to, you know, the degree of risk that somebody who is unvaccinated that is costing the hospital and society so much money, I mean, overwhelmingly, the people that are diabetic and the people that are metabolically broken are costing us the most. But guess what? Most of the politicians are diabetic, or I shouldn't say diabetic, but metabolically broken and in the boomer age category, and therefore won't likely impose a tax on themselves. So you got to think about, what does this actually mean? Does this mean that any risky behavior could potentially be taxed because you're going to be a burden on the system? A kid that decides to be a BMX stunt rider, are they going to be taxed differently? Where does this end? You have a bureaucrat say, oh, based on this actuary table, no, I don't think you can skateboard. You're likely to break a leg. Sorry, I don't think you can drive that car. It's going to go too fast. You're going to cause an accident. What are we doing? What are we doing? I hope this just cracks open the massive conversation about health. Because if this is where we're going, I'm all in, man. Let's have that conversation, because I've been banging my head against the wall as to why the government is saying we're looking out for your health, when in reality, they're not. They've never wanted to look out for your health. If they did, they would have addressed the obesity epidemic in our kids. For shit's sake, over the last 2 years, obesity in children has doubled because of lockdowns. That's fucked up. So when the government says we're doing this for your health, always take that with a grain of salt. Every great writer in history has, especially if they write about governments and overreach, they always warn about governments saying that they're doing this for your own good. And therefore, this is the stage we're at right now, and this is the stage that we need to start fighting back. So have a good look at the charter. Start reading it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's our document. And yeah, the lawyers can debate and everything, but it's our interpretation that matters. And if we interpret this as, this is bullshit, you say that we're supposed to be equal. You say that we're supposed to be free of unjust laws. You say that we're supposed to be able to travel freely throughout our own country. And if you're a Canadian citizen, be able to leave it whenever you so choose. All of these policies, all of these mandates, aren't they at face value breaking the law? Now, that's where the lawyers come in, right? Everything is based on decisions and precedents. So I hope the lawyers are coming, but the lawyers aren't the brave human beings that are going to they're not the ones that are going to march in the streets and demand this. They will do the work if they're asked to. So therefore, it's the individuals like us that are kind of fed up. And so who are the individuals like us, right? And I count myself in with this group that was determined and given a name here in Peter Attia podcast as the alt middle. And I love it because he defines it based on two extreme ends, which is the COVIDiots. Those are the tinfoil hat wearing, conspiracy, only take ivermectin kind of individuals that are just way out on the fringe. And unfortunately, I mean, I shouldn't say unfortunately, you can think whatever the hell you want, man. I don't care. Like it's a lot of curious ideas out there. And you know what? A lot of these fringe ideas have been proven to be true in the last few years, which is frightening. But ultimately there's those individuals, the COVIDiots, that have been, I guess, used as a means to lump everybody in that doesn't have the same opinion as the government. And those individuals that are all in with the government mandates, all in with everything that government says, all in regardless. They wear 3 masks, they wear a face shield. They're basically the equivalent of North American Taliban, man. The women are just freaking covered head to toe in freaking PPE. Their kids, PPE to the max. Those are like COVIDians. Like this is their religion. This is safety at all costs. Safetyism, safetyism, safetyism. That's the other extreme without any nuance, right? If you don't follow the government rules, you're killing everybody. This is how they believe things are playing out right now. The alt middle, and I agree with Dr. Attia on this, is the silent majority. The ones that have genuine questions, genuine concerns, a lot of anger. These are the business owners that have had their businesses closed. These are the individuals that weren't able to go and be with their dying relatives. These are the parents that don't understand why the schools keep on closing when no children are getting sick and the teachers are fine. Why are we still wearing masks? What is the end state? Why do we keep on getting told to do things that don't feel right? Why is my church closed? Why do I need a freaking code to go get a coffee and show ID to a 19-year-old barista? Why is it that COVID-19 is still raging through our population and we're talking about case numbers when in no time in history did we ever talk about how many people are infected by any disease ever, because it's an irrelevant statistic. It is ICU beds being taken up and deaths. That alone puts you in the ranks of alt middle. And if I can amplify that as much as possible, then this is my goal here. If you are in that alt middle, you've got questions, very reasonable questions. Okay. Then you need to start speaking up. You need to start talking to your MP. You need to start talking to your provincial member of parliament. You need to start talking to the justice minister. You need to start calling. You need to start raising hell, because safetyism, which is a great term that I just learned, is the predominant rule of the land right now. Our politicians are not brave. Our politicians have zero spine. They keep on using the same paradigm, which is zero COVID. We're well past that, folks. Everybody I know We all have vaccines. We all got this cold. We all got COVID. And we spent 2 years huddling in fear, worrying that it's going to kill us all. And we're fine. So why the lockdowns? Why the curfews? Why the masking? Where's the end state? If there's no end state, then this is perpetuity. Are you willing to live like this in perpetuity? And I would argue, if you're listening to this podcast, the answer is no. I'm not willing to live like this in perpetuity. I'm not willing to live with policy by fiat, by a king that has basically been self-appointed during emergency measures over 2 years. And if you can think about the illogic or the ridiculousness of that statement, a 2-year emergency is no longer an emergency. There are so many inconsistencies and zero evidence to back up their movement going forward. We need answers. We need justifications. We need to have open discourse. We need to have open sessions of parliament. We need politicians to actually do their jobs and represent their communities when they say, hey, start speaking up. We need this to be fixed. As a parent, I'm not looking forward to sending my kids to school next year if this is the current state. I'm deeply concerned that there's a generational disaster coming our way with the schools being closed, with the psychological trauma that we've imposed on our children, and the psychological trauma that's imposed on our parents. For what? For absolutely nothing. For nothing. If the data continues to prove itself true, we might very well have an entire generation of children that are psychologically broken and killing themselves at a rate unseen in human history. I can't possibly see a world developing like that without me taking a stance and saying enough is enough. We need to get away from this cowardly lion type position and get on the front foot and say enough. We're going to take over. Those individuals that aren't scared, get out there, start working again, start opening your businesses, start being a human being again, and break the cycle of fear. I think the best thing that I saw from Netflix the last 2 weeks was that movie, it's Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio, because I think it was just masterfully done. Because it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, you interpret this how you see your worldview. And I think that was the message. And ultimately, one of the last scenes, the meteors coming to evaporate Earth, and one of the last things they did, they turned off the news. That's what I'm encouraging you to do as well. Turn off the news. I haven't been watching news even before COVID because this is just bullshit. Start listening to individuals like Peter Attia that have a much better perspective than what's being basically pushed down your throat from the mainstream, which doesn't have any nuance, which only provides you what people want to see because they are strapped for cash. They need people to tune in. That is no service to you. Find the mediums, find the people that are actually out there doing good work. Reconnect with your community. And that's what we're doing here. Okay. So if you're in the Montreal area, I strongly recommend you come out and start making those bonds again. If you're in the West Island, we're doing a meetup this Saturday. So I'm going to be releasing this. This is let me check the date here, the 12th of January. On the 15th, which is Saturday, we're going to be meeting up down at the Pine Beach Gazebo. So that's the corner of Pine Beach Boulevard and Lakeshore Road in Dorval, Montreal, Quebec, on the island of Montreal, Quebec, to start rebuilding our communities, to start breaking the cycle of fear. There's too many people that don't know what to do. Well, we need to do something, and that's our first step. Action begets action. Rebuild your communities. And if you want to get some more info on how to do that, I strongly recommend you come and join us at the Filthy Canucks. So this is an initiative that I've started on my own with a few other key helpers in the background to start rebuilding these communities and start putting pressure on our governments to start opening up, and let's rebuild our societies again. So if you go to filthycanuck.co/opt-in, that's OPTIN, you can head to my landing page and you can join our mailing list. All this is a means to disseminate information and to help you with the rebuild and to help you as an alt-middle human being get some perspective and get some research and get some insight into how we can get out of this, because if we don't define an end state, this is going to keep on happening to us and we're never going to get out of it. And I'm too proud of a Canadian to let this slide and slip out of our fingers. So let's get to work for folks. filthycanucks.co. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. You can find out more about training, nutrition, and mindset at davemorrow.net. Be sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram at Dave Morrow PT. And don't forget, strong people are hard to kill.